All right, now we're going to continue on with the second part of our presentation. The law of armed conflict at present comprises the Geneva Conventions, the Hague Conventions, and a number of other treaties and laws. These laws are considered to be binding for the countries that are signatories to the treaties of which they are composed, although it is important to note that not all countries are party to such treaties. The laws specify what countries are and are not permitted to do in times of war, as well as the applicability to those that are non-state actors and those that are not signatories to the treaties. The Hague Conventions are somewhat more focused on the actual conduct of war, while the Geneva Convention is oriented in a humanitarian direction, dealing with combatants, unlawful combatants, non-combatants. And I decided to focus this presentation, this aspect of the presentation, on the Geneva Conventions because there's some interesting aspects here that will reappear in other parts of this presentation. So, after World War II, the Geneva Conventions were passed, and there was, or actually, there's a second version of Geneva Conventions. But anyway, define a POW as a member of an armed force, although we don't exactly have a definition for an armed force, but we'll get to that. So they had to meet. So somebody who was a member of this undefined armed force was considered a lawful member if they had certain attributes, such as distinctive sign like a uniform, which was recognizable. They openly carried their arms. They conducted their operations with the laws and customs of war, etc. Okay, no problem. So it goes on to detail how prisoners are treated, humanely, gotta be, not intimidated and mistreated, respect, honored, etc., etc., etc. Gotta let them have a smoke. Can't deny them Article 26. Gotta have that smoky. Anyway. So, there's a number of different specific criteria given to how you treat a lawful combatant, but not an unlawful combatant. Oh, by the way, they can wear their badges and ranks in the prisons and things like that. And you have to pay them at least a minimum wage. Okay, no problem. Now, a couple of problems. One, force and armed force are actually not defined through the UN Charter or other actually ratified treaty or agreement. Although one that's been proposed as part of an update to the Geneva Conventions back in 1977 is a party to a conflict, but that has not been ratified. So, by definition and by design, somebody who is not a lawful combatant is by definition an unlawful combatant. And you know what kind of protections they have? We'll get to that. So the law of armed conflict was developed in an attempt to mitigate the atrocities of war, such as the rape of Nanking, which is illustrated here. It was also developed to deal with the issues of warfare that take place on an entirely mental and physical level. Now, in this course, we have added cyber warfare as an additional dimension. Thus, we need to either adapt or reinterpret the existing laws of war to fit, or create new laws to fit some of the special situations that cyber warfare creates. As we discussed in the previous presentation, when I was talking about ethics of cyber warfare, it's also important to note that the law of armed conflict is primarily intended to govern the conduct of war between states. In cyber warfare, it is entirely possible that we will find ourselves facing an opponent that is fully capable of carrying out attacks that would be considered an act of war if launched by a state, but are in fact sourced to an individual or a small group. The situation is specifically covered later on in this presentation. So when we look into the specifics of the laws of warfare, we find that they are constructed on an older set of concepts called the just war theory, or bellum justum, whatever. Now, just war theory gives us a good framework on which to discuss the ethics of warfare in general and more specifically cyber warfare. In just war theory, we look at conduct during 3 phases of war: beginning, just ad bellum, or the right to wage; during a war, just in bello, conduct during war, and ending a war, just post bellum, ending a war after it's over, post. When discussing just war theory, the right to wage war and the proper conduct during war are universally included. These principles find their origin in ancient Rome, often first attributed to Cicero, and have been the basis of the rules of warfare from then to modern times. Justice after war is a newer concept, and it has its basis with Immanuel Kant, a philosopher from the 18th century, photographed here, or really illustrated here, and not looking very happy, but he was a sad fellow. Each major section of just war theory, just ad bellum, bello, and post bellum, contains a number of principles that provide more specific guidance, as some of these principles have been modified, removed, added, and argued over for thousands of years. The specific principles and their meanings vary greatly from one source to another. In fact, with sufficient research, it's possible to find two entirely different sets of principles for a given concept, but the general ideas remain the same for each. Just ad bellum discusses the right to wage war. The 5 principles of this are just ad bellum. The 5 principles of just ad bellum are right authority, right intention, probability of success, last resort, and proportionality. The right to wage war is a concept that is largely tied to nation states, which are much more bound to the laws of war than individuals or organizations, criminal or otherwise. In case of non-state attackers, the concept of the right to wage war may be reduced to more of a question of having the capability of doing so. For those who have no intention of obeying domestic or international laws in the first place, the legal and moral barriers posed by the laws of warfare are likely no impediment at all. The legal authority that allows us to carry out attacks from a combination of laws on a national and international level, treaties, and various other institutions. How exactly such laws relate to issues of cyber warfare is still in the process of being worked out and could definitely be an issue. Of particular note for applicability in cyber warfare is the fact that only the legitimate authorities of a state have the legal authority to wage warfare. In effect, this means that a state, generally the equivalent of a country, is the only entity that can legally wage war. For conventional warfare, the legal authority to wage war on an international scale and the capability to do so generally match up closely. When we look at cyber warfare, the capability to conduct warfare differs greatly in the sense of resources required. A trip to a local computer store and a small amount of coding ability can be sufficient to arm a group or individuals for cyber war. In such cases, the laws of war do not apply to criminal organizations, hacktivists, individual hackers, and the like, and they considered to be unlawful combatants. Unlawful combatants do not enjoy the protections of the laws of war and can be prosecuted under the laws of the state in which they are detained. Similar laws apply to corporations that conduct such unlawful cyber operations, such as corporate espionage and what have you. That's really a question mark. Do these apply? Anyway, although the consequences to them may be somewhat different, meaning corporations from a legal standpoint, nonetheless, it's arguable that they do apply. I know that was a bit circular, wasn't it? Anyway, in order for a non-state actor, to be detained or prosecuted as an unlawful combatant, they would need to have committed an act that would be considered to be a use of force if they had been a nation state. Which leads us back to the issue of use of force in cyber war. When is it? When is it present? When is it not? It's complicated. So, anyway. Right intention in warfare specifies that we may only use or threaten force against another state for a truly just cause. It is understood by the signatories to the UN, bless their hearts, that this specifically refers to a response to the use of force and not other actions of an unfriendly nature, such as what's quoted there, which is from the UN Charter. Regardless of the way in which such attacks are used, such unfriendly acts would include many attacks of a cyber nature, excluding an attack that had an effect qualifying it as a use of force, which we talked about in the last presentation. While these may not be classified as actual acts of war, the results may still be devastating. The principle of probability of success dictates that force may not be used in a futile war effort. What would be a futile war effort? Oh, I know. How about one where you say, let's throw some Tomahawk cruise missiles, but let's not actually have them have any objective other than, actually, I don't know. Let's just throw some missiles at somebody. Why? I don't know. For example, suppose there's a country, a big country with lots of resources, and they all of a sudden out of the blue decide that another country has committed some transgression, let's call it. And they say, we're going to throw some missiles, but we're not going to actually commit to having boots on the ground, and we're going to break a bunch of stuff, maybe, but we're not going to actually deal with the underlying structural issue that led to the problem to begin with. What's the point? I don't know, but sounds to me like something that's happening in Syria. September 2013, just saying. Anyway. So, as we discussed previously, the distinction between what does and does not constitute use of force depends on the ultimate effect of the actions in question. In the case where a cyber attack did not result in an outcome of a physical nature, it would likely not be considered a use of force. This leaves the possibility of a state using lesser attacks that are of a harassing or disruptive nature without violating this particular tenet of jus ad bellum. It does seem likely that the definition of use of force will need to be changed at some point, specifically to avoid parties using this as a loophole through which to conduct cyber attacks with impunity. The principle of last resort stipulates that force may be used only after diplomacy fails, or is considered to not be practical, as is the case in the principle of probability of success. The definition of use of force in cyber warfare is an issue of importance, although the actual issue of use of force might be problematic. There are many cyber attacks that could be used short of the use of force. In the case of attacks that do equate to use of force, for UN signatories, approval by the UN Security Council would likely be required in most cases. Let me try this another way. The feckless UN Security Council. But I digress. Ooh, that's not good. The principle of proportionality states that the benefits of warfare must outweigh the harms that are caused by it. In cyber warfare, due to the potential unpredictable results of our attacks, judging proportionality may be a somewhat difficult prospect. While we can launch a cyber attack that, with the intention and relative surety that it will have a limited set of effects, the possibility always exists that we will do a far greater amount of harm than was originally planned. Jus ad in bello. The idea of jus in bello specifies how a state must act during times of war. The two principles of jus in bello are distinction and proportionality. Distinction covers the way we carry out the war itself in the sense of which targets are and are not legitimate. The concept of proportionality means that we cannot attack a legitimate target and cause a great deal of collateral damage in the surrounding area without cause to do so. Alright, this is going to take a second. The concept of distinction specifies that war should not be directed at non-combatants and neutral parties. In conventional warfare, while the concept is not always easy to carry out, it is rather clear-cut. We should not attack civilian targets without affecting a sufficiently valuable military goal as the end goal. In the logical world, where cyber operations are carried out, this distinction is more difficult to make. When I say logical world, remember, computers, software, hardware is all based on a coded set of instructions, which are logic-based. If, then what. Anyway, due to the intermingled nature of military and civilian networks and systems, it makes things difficult. When we attempt to make the distinction between such targets, there may actually not be a separation, as many such targets will be dual use. We also have some difficulty when it comes to the matter of neutral parties in cyber warfare, given the nature of cyber operations. Attack traffic can traverse a wide variety of networks and systems in order to reach its intended target. We may be routing packets through the networks of multiple different parties, some of them neutral, some of them not, and many of them completely unaware that the traffic is even going through their infrastructure. We may also have the possibility of a target not actually being located in the state, meaning nation, that is being attacked. Our opponent could have systems located in multiple different geographic locations in order to render such systems more difficult to attack physically, and such a system might be physically located in a neutral country. This also brings up the question of whether there are obligations for a neutral party to take steps to stop attacks coming from or routing through their country. Such questions will likely not be resolved until sufficient cyber incidents have occurred that new laws are created to deal with them, or the present ones are given new interpretations to include them. Non-combatants are a particular issue in cyber war. In conventional warfare, the issue of not attacking combatants is somewhat clearer cut. In general, we do not want to bomb orphanages, hospitals, and other similar areas that are considered to be in non-military nature. But if you're in Egypt, it's okay to bomb churches, even if they're like several thousand years old, but I digress. Although such rules do not always hold true, accidental strikes do happen and opponents do sometimes use facilities as shields, but the rules are relatively clear. Magic fuzzy pants. What's that all about, dude? Well, I'll explain. When considering a cyber operation, the boundaries between what is acceptable and not acceptable are not all as clear. In fact, they're a bit fuzzy, like these pants. We always prefer in the law bright lines, which is strict. You're either on the left of the line or the right of the line. At present, such activities are carried out almost universally over public networks, and these same networks are used by civilians and military equally. We cannot presently attack one group without affecting the other in an equal measure. When we destroy the infrastructure in order to remove the capability for communications and propaganda from the hands of our opponents, we also disable such services for the civilian and non-combatant populace. While it is easy to say that we cause no true permanent harm by taking out the internet connectivity in an area, we may be causing more of a significant impact than we might think. We may be disabling connectivity for those working for companies from remote locations, people who operate stores over the internet, or schools that access the educational materials online, like Blackboard. Worse yet, we may be disabling the systems that enable the distribution of food and supplies, SCADA, the infrastructure systems that monitor and control utilities and other critical components. Removing the ability to run heating or air conditioning systems at certain times of year may result in the loss of life. Destroying or disabling network systems or infrastructure in an area of poorer economic status may leave a considerable barrier between the local populace being able to restore such functionality within any reasonable amount of time. Permanently removing such systems may have a profound effect indeed, even without shedding a drop of blood with the weapons of conventional warfare. The concept of proportionality covers the effects of the attacks in relation to the type of target being attacked. If we attack a target that is a military objective, we cannot cause harm to targets that are civilian, non-combatants, or neutral parties while carrying out this attack that is in excess of the value of the original target. Problematically, the effects of cyber attacks can be difficult to detect or quantify, meaning measure. Whether such attacks do physical damage or not, the estimated amount of damage done would need to come from the party being attacked, without any direct way of verifying such claims on the attackers or any interested third parties. Since, other than any obvious physical components of the attack, there is no immediate and publicly visible effect, such estimates can prove to be guesswork at best. Additionally, some cyber attacks are reversible and some are not. If we use something along the lines of a denial of service attack or distributed denial of service attack, the first order effects should be relatively reversible. When we stop the attack, a few systems may need to be rebooted or restored, but this should largely be the extent of any material damage. If we use a cyber attack to take control of the systems managing the water level in a dam and the dam breaches, then we have caused a great deal of physical damage that cannot be undone. It could be repaired, it could be fixed, but it can't per se be undone. Once you're dead, you're dead. As with conventional warfare, we need to be concerned with our cyber attacks affecting people and facilities that are not considered to be part of the conflict. Considering that the systems and networks that provide the basis for such operations are the same systems and networks that public services operate over, achieving this separation can be rather difficult. Given the present structure of our networks, being able to direct our attacks so as to avoid impacting non-combatants, as is specified in the Hague and Geneva Conventions that I mentioned earlier, may be very difficult, if possible at all. In the future, we may see changes to systems and networks in order to separate civilian networks from military networks, and in order to make such distinctions easier to arrive at in times of war or crisis. When we look at attempting to limit attacks in cyber warfare, we encounter a rather technically difficult proposition. As the internet is not geographically bounded, attacks of a logical nature, even when carried out in the greatest care and planning, are very likely to have impacts that we do not anticipate. Warning! Danger, Will Robinson. Oh, maybe I should use that picture. Danger, Will Robinson. Anyway, in the context of using malware as a tool of cyber warfare, limiting such attacks may prove to be exceptionally difficult indeed. Why? Well, we can certainly implement the features in such tools in an attempt to limit them to a particular network, geographic area, or any number of other factors. Such efforts will not always be successful, even if we were to code our attack tools in such a way as to be limited to a particular computer address in order to only target a given organization. We might also be likely to infect geographically distant machines that were connected over various kinds of connections in relation or other things. In effect, we would be very likely to spread a tool of cyber warfare into personally owned systems, other countries, and support organizations in very short order. One potential solution to such issues is the implementation of logical borders to match our physical borders in areas that are largely physically separate from other landmasses. Australia, for instance, such an implementation may be somewhat easier to carry out, at least from a wired perspective. If we were to attempt the same in one of the countries in Western Europe, the task becomes considerably more difficult, although challenging to implement, such as divisions. But such divisions may be beneficial, but really is an open question about whether this is truly possible. Just post bellum defines justice after war, basically how to properly shut down and handle the aftermath of the war. The principles of just post bellum are seeking a lasting peace, good luck, hold morally culpable individuals accountable, and extract reparations. Again, good luck on that one. I really couldn't find a good picture that illustrated the concept of a lasting peace, since the world has been at war since there's been a world. But I did find this really cool quote from Reagan about peace through strength. So, anyway, moving on. As I discussed earlier in this presentation, in the section on just ad bellum, when we covered the need for a legitimate authority for a state to wage war, peace must also be offered and accepted by a legitimate authority. While this is the normal state in conventional warfare, in cyber warfare, our opponent may very well be a non-state actor, such as a hacker, hacktivist, or criminal corporation. In such a case, these non-state actors are likely to be considered a lawful combatant and take an extended vacation someplace warm. Just kidding. Not really. With respect to holding morally culpable individuals accountable for actions under cyber warfare may be a difficult prospect. As we have discussed several times in this chapter, many cyber attacks fall outside the bounds of the use of force. For such activities, it is unlikely that there will be anything substantial for which someone might be held to account. For attackers that do qualify as use of force, finding a specific individual for which to pin responsibility might be difficult. That's why I'm having Saddam, because he was the one who was pointed as the bad guy, and boom, there you go. Cyber warfare, it's a little different. For example, in the case where a malware infection causes the system responsible for formulating a particular medication to produce an improperly mixed batch, we have several points of which we could assign blame. We could blame the author of the malware, although proving that they had this particular intent in mind when writing it would prove difficult. If we could identify them at all, we could blame the worker at the facility that carried the malware in on a thumb drive and infected the system, although this was likely done completely by accident. We could blame the system administrator for not having sufficient controls in place to catch the malware, and we could go on and on. In some cases, we may have sufficient evidence to attribute such attacks to individuals, if they indeed were attacks at all, but these are likely to be a few and far between. Even in such cases, the possibility of being able to prosecute such actions will, in all probability, be limited to state-sponsored activities. A couple final thoughts, Jerry Springer. Extract reparations. The process of extracting reparations for an act of war runs into many of the same difficulties we find in attempting to hold individuals accountable for such actions. We may be able to link a cyber attack to a particular individual or state, but outside of an officially declared war, reparations seem unlikely, as is in the case of many interactions that take place in the world of the logical. Attacks of cyber nature will probably be of a less forthright and formal nature than conventional warfare. Well, that is utterly ridiculous. Eat more chicken.